All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Eric. It's all yours.
Thanks, everybody. Steve has boxed me in here. I normally like to walk and talk, but I guess I have a little tiny little space here I have to stay in. I'm Eric Westgard out of NY9D from Minneapolis, and my thesis here today is getting amateur radio back. I believe we've lost our way in the notion of emergency communications, and you know, the league says, hey, we've got more hams than ever before, but I think when they join and they say, hey, I'm all excited to get involved, and they come find us, it's not what they thought. And I think given what's happening in the world of emergency communications, I'd like to see us get back in the game and get back in the leadership role, which we've had for many, many years. And I'm going to tell two stories, sort of how I got involved in this, how we built a big network up in the Twin Cities, and then also how we're leading the way up there in emergency communications. And I think that there's a wider message that we can follow. So our organization, I run a little club, and it's a sort of informal club. I heard the guy, the last talk about the software-defined radio. They had 1,000 people. We got about a dozen, maybe up there, including 7 good Linux programmers who I'm very, very proud of. And our mission really comes out of the FCC rules and regulations, which are advancing the state of the radio art, providing emergency communications, and my favorite one is, advancing skills in communications and technical phases. And we've been doing a lot of work lately with D-Star, and I'm getting a storm of controversy up in the Twin Cities from a lot of the officials that are sort of been running things for a long time, especially in the league. And the commentary is, well, it's too new, it's unproven, it's not ham radio. And if you look at the FCC rules, there is not a Part F that says preserve and protect legacy modes for future generations. Anybody seen it in there? Haven't seen that. And I get this. Everybody go, what about Part F? And I was like, there isn't a Part F, guys. So that's kind of where, and I think I'm preaching to the choir on that one. So a little bit of history. I like to start a little bit of history. Right after a certain domestic terrorism event, which I'm sort of tired of talking about, it's almost cliche, I got a call from a ham who was trying to put a radio tower in his backyard. And he says, look, Eric, I need you some help. I got to go to the county board. We got to put up a tower for emergency communications. And I grabbed a copy of the Wall Street Journal out of the lunchroom. It was, the 4 o'clock, and that was when I get my copy, right, the one that no one else was reading. And it was talking about a dirty bomb, and the notion of a dirty bomb, and it was talking about, this is in 2002, very early, evacuation, and the fact that we didn't have any emergency room capacity, and, the notion of, in the Twin Cities, and we're here, for those who are not familiar with Minnesota geography in the center, what are you going to do if 1.75 million people suddenly decide that they're going to get in their cars and drive to Duluth, right? You got to tell the people in Duluth, hey, get some cots out, right? Okay, so, and the question is, who's in charge of that? And in 2002, I would argue, and I think that my friend, the state communications officer in Minnesota, would argue, that was ham radio. There was nobody with this sort of big picture view of emergency communications. And if you think about the systems we had, especially the national traffic system, which I'm a big fan of, Alpha, Bravo, Delta, how can they handle a 1.75 million person evacuation? And the answer was no. And so I thought about it a little while and said, what do we got that could do that? And packet radio came to mind. And we all know packet's dead. It's been dead for a long time. There was a couple of stations, and I got home, a little blue one here called MNCCC, and one here and one, there's a couple that my friend Kaiser LAV had been running. And I said, where is this MNCCC? Turns out it was in Duluth. Turns out it was 180 feet. It was on a beam pointed toward the Twin Cities, and the other end had disappeared. And I ran into the guy, and I said, what if we built a network that covered the whole state of Minnesota and could be used for things like evacuation? He says, I was about to pull the plug on MNCCC because there's nothing at the other end, right? So I said, stop, wait, hold it. So I put the word out, and the answer I got back is can't be done, shouldn't be done, too expensive, won't happen. I said, by God, that's my reason to go, right? And the opposition we've gotten to this network and the next one gets us up in the morning. And the more grief I get, the more spring in my step that I have. And that's our, so we started combing dumpsters, and our local ham radio dealers, to tell you what, I'll take broken 50-watt radios, put a 25-watt transmitter chip, that's Radio City Dan, and I'll sell them to you for $50. And Amateur Radio Consignment Center said they run the widow wagon. They go to visit the widows with the truck and bring all the stuff back. He says, every TNC I get, I'll call you. And we ended up buying about 50 TNCs. And we just went on the road and started talking to cities and counties and towns and saying, we're here for emergency communications. We've been doing it for 25 years, and we want to put a little piece of equipment on your roof that's going to help us if we have to evacuate the Twin Cities. Pandemic flu, a little before pandemic flu. People started saying yes. In fact, no one turned us down. So we got 6 ham clubs. We got just literally passed the hat at meetings, and we started building this network. 2-meter packet is the most wonderful thing. You put a coat hanger in the air on 2-meter packet, and you have a node. I mean, it's just, I never cease to be amazed. My friend Paul's favorite trick on a Saturday night when he's bored, he starts in the Twin Cities, goes up the right-hand side of our network, down the left-hand side, and talks to himself in his shack. Now, what's it supposed to work on 2 meters? 20, 30 miles? We get these amazing band openings. So we built this network. Couldn't be done, shouldn't be done. And I started going on a road with a view graph, this picture. And I went to visit various cities, counties. I talked to the Minnesota Association of Emergency Managers. Their first comment was, you need to see the FBI. So I said, okay. So I went down to the FBI, and I went to the Federal Executive Board of Minnesota, all the leaders of outside the general from the Army and the Air Force and the CIA and the FBI. And here's me, that guy from the Ham Radio Club, right? And I did one smart thing, though. I said, I'm here from the federal government, and I'm here to help. They laughed. They thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard in their life, because we are federal, right? And it's like, oh, my God, one of our boys, they open arms. First guy says, you need 2 tractor-trailer loads of used equipment. I said, yeah, actually, I do. And so anyways, that's our story. So that's been our calling card. And this thing has been running since 2002. And a couple things. I had lunch with a guy from Air Inc., who probably doesn't want to reveal where he worked or anything like that. Tried to sell them a triple redundant Unix computer about 10 years ago. Failed at that. But I had this idea. If we're going to build a packet network, let's put in a triple redundant core network. I didn't make this up. I just came up with it. And so we put in 3 nodes on secret sites on government and commercial buildings. We have not been down since 2002. So do the numbers on that in terms of reliability. So I say, I've got a 6 or 7 nines network that I've been running since 2002 on secret commercial sites, covers the whole Twin Cities. That on the previous map, I go to these governments, they're going, we don't have anything like that. Remember, we're supposed to be the guys that are fetching the coffee, right? All of a sudden, we got something pretty cool. So we built our own backbone. We have a couple of lessons here. We don't share sites with anybody, rule number 1. And rule number 2 is we get our own site. So somebody says, I got a repeater here, I got 2 repeaters here, somebody's backyard. We don't do that because you get into fights. We have, the toddler property laws, right? What's mine is mine, what yours is mine, and we avoided all that. And we have a couple of rules. No fans, no disk drives, and we only use type-accepted radio transmitters. So somebody says, yeah, I got these old Motorola's from 1969. Sorry, thanks, no. And we've avoided APRS. We stayed off the existing packet. So we went and got our own frequency. Actually, we got this frequency because we got kicked off the old frequency back in the 80s. So that was how we ended up. And our take, and I can say this because people say you're throwing rocks at packet. It's a great protocol, but it's obsolete. It is the equivalent of starting a computer club and only allowing Commodore 64s. So that's our story on packet, but it's given us a calling card. Used to get a lot of complaints. People aren't using packet. Duh, right? Okay. So we put in some bulletin boards. I had 5 old computers, and I gave them to one of our guys, and he said, why don't I load some kind of funky JNOS and put them around the state? And the deal on these is, if we have a disaster, we meet somewhere. So we're evacuating, let's go back to my evacuating the Twin Cities analogy. By the way, how many 1 million person evacuations have we had in the last 5 years? Anybody know? 2. Pomodoro out in California, and yeah. They tried, I think, to evacuate 1 million people, and they failed, right? But what was the last one? The one, yeah, okay. There's probably been quite a few. And you say to yourself, you need a lot of data for that. But that is, you meet at a bulletin board system. So messages and information are going to be here. And people can meet from around the state and set up long, persistent sessions. And that's been a pretty good model in terms of where to meet. So we've had some PR success. One of the things I've learned about projects is you want people to know what you're doing. The kind of the lone wolf sitting at home working in their basement. You don't get a lot of, 20 years after you're dead, right? You'll get an award or something. But we complained about what our problems and talked about our issues constantly, gave a lot of talks. And we had things happen like the Minnesota Department of Health flew us out to Washington, D.C. to give a talk at a major preparedness conference. We got invited to a big pan flu. Anybody been to pandemic flu meetings? Anybody been to more than 5? Yeah, okay. So huge federal pandemic flu, lock the doors and top secret. And by the way, they said, okay, now the people that really have it together on pan flu and are going to be the leaders, that would be Eric, amateur radio, and like one other agency. All the beginners, you're in the other room. I said, hey, that's pretty cool. But you kind of get the word. And then someone says, here we are, we're on the front of the communications handbook. If anybody says, are we doing stuff that people have heard about? Now, something happened along the way. We went to all these meetings. And in fact, the agencies, the rules have changed in emergency communications. We started hearing this from a couple of people. The Red Cross said in 2007 in May, quote, we don't use voice radios anymore. Now, this is when it was a huge meeting. The Red Cross CIO got up and told us this. And we go, that's really cool because we don't either, right? We're data people. And some other people got up and said, no, we're only in the FM and repeaters. And there's this huge fight broke out. And I think, I don't know, either Sumner's been reading our website or, and in fact, there was on the 26th in the ALL Aries letter, there was a little note from the Red Cross saying, by the way, we don't use voice radios anymore. We use a thing called Safe and Sound. It's a website. Hold on to that thought. So one of our key customers who liked us early on was the Minnesota Department of Health. I met with them, and they said, we've been reading QST, and we'd like to have you be our backup supplier of communications. You guys did great stuff in 9/11, blah, blah, blah. They have, 92 public health officers around the state, and they wanted us to hook them up. Kind of if the phones didn't work and the internet didn't work. They've had the worst time with sat phones. I'll tell you all kinds of sat phone stories. I know we have some. Small problem, though. Their system for delivering emergency communications is a website. So Packet didn't work, NTS didn't work. They said, we got to get to this. This is where the pandemic flew. This is where the treatment, this is where the vaccine stuff is going to be. Red Cross, all the other agencies said, we've got to use the websites. Now, the good news about all the emergency communications funding, and I would argue it's been a couple $2 billion a year, is everybody and their dog is in emergency communications. There's consultants, contractors, all these people running around. The bad news is this is no longer a ham radio preserve, right? We said, I'm from ham radio. Now they're like, who are you? And I got 300 consultants in the lobby and just go away. That's kind of what I'm getting. But the good news on that is that we have a job now under NIMS and Incident Command System. So they can't put us in. If you go to these big communications meetings, there's a whole class on what to do with unwanted volunteers, right? So we're not in that bucket anymore. We have a real job. But we have to be doing the lingo. And one of the things, that if you want to drive professionals, people, and Dennis Dura lectured us on this, people getting a paycheck in the world of emergency communications, if you want to drive them crazy, make them nuts, talk about incident command system constantly. Use the jargon, talk about NIMS, and just don't let it drop. And they're going, wait a minute, these are the guys who we kind of have on the unwanted volunteer list, but they're telling us, they seem to know more about this stuff than we do. I'm going, duh, that's our job. All right, hint there. Okay, let's talk about the real world. Medtronic Twin Cities Marathon. You guys in Chicago have a big marathon. It's called the Chicago Marathon. Yours is about 3 times as big, but for the moment, we'll just kind of forget that. And Ham Radio runs the communications for this one. I think we do for Chicago. True story, our medical director says, Eric, you guys do a pretty good job, but I want you to go out and see the real professionals. I said, well, who's that? The Marine Corps Marathon. That's the place. They're the leaders. You guys are pretty good. Went out to Washington, D.C., Marine Corps Marathon, walked up and said, excuse me, but where are the Marine Corps people? They go, sorry, there aren't any. All our communications is ham radio operators. So that was very funny. So we had a good relationship with those folks, and we've been pals ever since. So we've got a big medical tent. Ours is 40 by 80. We see about 300 patients in 3 hours. The one in Chicago I've heard is like the size of a football field or something, and very, very big. Anybody work on the Chicago Marathon? The volunteers? Yeah, it's a huge operation. And here's just some things going on. Here's the check-in. By the way, that's R.J. Frasconi, who's head of emergency medicine for St. Paul. About a year ago, he surprised me. He's top ER doctor. He calls me up and says, Eric, I need a copy of a book. I said, okay, called Now You're Talking. And he says, I need to get a ham radio license if I'm going to be anybody. And I said, we can help you with that. 12's the best $20 I ever spent. And here we are, patients rolling in, and that's my son and one of our guys, and we have the yellow shirts. In fact, I have 120 yellow shirts on the floor of my living room right now. We're checking in patients, and our packet equipment and our D-Star equipment is right inside there. Where the rubber meets the road at the Twin Cities Marathon is Family Medical. And this is a tent. It looks like O'Hare Airport the day before Thanksgiving. I've got 6 laptops in there right now. And people come to that after the race saying, my mother was supposed to have finished 2 hours ago, and is she dead? You know, and it's a legitimate question because people die at marathons, right? And so our job is to provide a location for their mother. So all along the system, and I'll talk more about this, we can say, yep, she dropped out and got in a cab at mile 12 about 2 hours ago. So, you know, you can provide that information if she's at the hospital. So just some things that we do. This is a good thing, the Twin Cities Marathon. Notice I've got 3 rigs parked out front. This is the medical tent is right where the speaker is. What's a bad thing is I don't have any rigs parked out front. And this happened in Chicago last year. They ran as I understand it, every ambulance within 40 miles was tied up. Every hospital was full. They had to cancel the race. So the community ran out of medical resources. We got close the same weekend in the Twin Cities. We ran through all of St. Paul Fire's rigs, all Minneapolis's rigs. We called in mutual aid, and we filled up 3 hospitals, and things were getting really ragged. In fact, the medical director came to me and said, Eric, we're going to have to call up. We have these rigs that we borrow. We're going to have to call those up. We're just about ready to, you know, we were hurting at the event. So here's what we do at the marathon. We've got all of our equipment, 5 voice repeaters, a bunch of data repeaters, 120 hams out on the course, mostly with handheld radios, 3 distributed net controls, and then we have our data trailer. And the data trailer is where the rubber meets the road. We've got our system called TrivNet DB. A guy named Dennis Boone wrote it for us a couple years ago. Remember the old Aries data? Remember that funky old flat file database? In fact, it might have been written by this group. We wrote a version of that for Linux. So it has a packet interface, character mode. The back end of it is TCP/IP, talks to 802.11, and we built a web front end for it. Uses MySQL and PHP and Apache. So it's web, 802.11, DStar, and packet. Coolest thing you ever saw. And then there's family medical information. So this is our system, 13,000 runners, about 200,000 spectators. This is the largest mass casualty event in Minnesota. Anybody know how many people went to the hospital when the 35W bridge collapsed up in Minnesota? By the way, just reopened it, around 50, 60, somewhere in there. How many did we send last year from the marathon? About 60. So we have people's attention now. This is a big deal. Here's the finish line area. We run a cross-agency medical dispatch and coordination center. That's run by amateur radio. We control all the agencies, do all the dispatching. There's our data trailer, and my friend Paul builds this impressive array of antennas. It looks like a gantry at NASA, and all the people are going, wow! And it's kind of part of our thing, our mystique, right? And here's family medical information. The whole finish line area we run on 802.11. 802.11 is cheap, it's easy, and non-hams can run it. One of the problems we have is we show up at a disaster and say, okay, I got 6 hams, mass chaos, and nobody without an FCC license does anything, right? That's not so good, right? So if you have a situation where you can use 802.11 and sort of, off-the-shelf stuff, we are in charge, and that works pretty good. And then here's our data setup. We've got our Linux server, our system called TrivNet, our DStar uplink transmitters. I was talking to some guys in the line about satellites. There's our laptops, and then out on the course, we get in via DStar or packet. The course covers the whole Twin Cities, so it's a pretty good kind of a wide area exercise. This is our magic right here. Anybody familiar with packet and that funky character mode interface? And I used to get calls, you've got to train some people on packet. I'm going, oh God. How many people do you have to train on the web? That would be none. So this is pretty cool. So we built this little web interface, first name, last name, and our job is location. Where is the missing person? The whole thing with HIPAA, we're not allowed to know their condition, but we can say, your mother is at Regents Hospital. What's her condition? I'm not allowed to know. And I can't tell you even if I did know, but the facility location is legal. And we use the bib number, which is the race number, but this could also be swapped for a telephone number. And if anybody calls me and says, well, what are you going to do about securing social security numbers? The answer is, I don't want to know social security numbers. But I think everybody has a phone number. So this is emergency communications as a sort of, DBMS, a database problem. Is, what sort of records do you want to keep? And the answer is, just their status and their bib number. And this is our little web interface. And this thing works over 802.11, works over DStar just fine. Speaking of DStar, we started doing this 25 years ago, and about 7 years ago, we said, we have a problem. We have too much data for packet. And we allegedly have a 9,600 BPS packet system in Minnesota. True story, it's been down for 5 years. We put up the statewide network, which people said, you can't use that, it's too slow, but it works like a champ. A 5.9 or 6.9 system is great for this. We were running out of gas. So our friends at ICOM announced a thing called D-Star. And my take on D-Star was, we've got 200 voice repeaters in Minnesota. Do I need a 201st? The answer is no, I don't. But I need something that handles 90 kilobits of data throughput. I work in this industry. 100 milliseconds of round-trip latency is pretty decent, right? And I need something with some power that can cover, what, a 26.5-mile race course across the whole metropolitan area. Boom, this thing dropped right in our lap. So our friends at Radio City, who became our bank, a lot of talk about banking and bank regulation right now, I would call up Dan and say, Dan, I want to buy a repeater. And Dan says, well, do you have any money? I said, no. He says, okay, fine. You know, it's like a farm banker. You know, he trusted us. And so we bought a repeater, and then I put the call out going, by the way, if somebody has to buy $3,000 radios, and like this week is good. And 5 times the ham community has come forward with that. So I don't know how that happened, but it just happened. It's been pretty cool. So anyways, we got a repeater, and we tested it, and there's our little web interface, and we said, my God, this thing works. And the most astonishing thing of all to us was we didn't need any cables, software, it was plug and play, it just worked. And this blew us away. We just couldn't, you know, there's no place for a screwdriver, and you can't adjust, and it made us crazy, but it worked pretty good. So we said, after about a week of this, we're going to put this thing in production. So we stuck it up on a high site, and it just was fine. So here's the first one we built. We put it up on 3M Center, and we built a little Linux appliance. Our Linux team has been working on these little Linux appliances, and it's a little miniature website, and it does a magical thing for us. We had a problem with this system. We did not want to put databases up on repeater sites. Remember our rule about rotating parts and fans and disk drives? And one of the things we've learned about repeater sites is the more you bother the people who give you free space, the more they wonder why they give you free space. Right? You may think about that. We like to go to our sites every 3 to 4 years to bother our site. So the answer is no fans, no disk drives, no system. The data had to be remote. It had to be sitting in our trailer. That didn't work with D-Star. So I posed this problem to our Linux team, 2 of whom at the same moment, Max and, trying to think, Kelly and Max at the same instant said, oh, why don't you run DNAT in the Linux? Because the D-Star repeater is it's not a repeater, it's a Ethernet bridge that completely doesn't care about layer 3. It never heard of TCP/IP. It doesn't even know. So the answer is if you're coming in TCP/IP with one subnet, you can have another radio coming in a different subnet, and it'll just hook them together. So we solve the one-to-many, any-to-any ID1 problem, and we could have our database remote. That was our key requirement. It just made us crazy because we promised, hey, we're going to put in D-Star, it's going to be great. Didn't work, made us crazy. So we have as many ID1s as you want. We have them on separate subnets. They go through the repeater, out the magic Ethernet on the back, into the Linux appliance where we have DNAT running, and these 3 guys can all talk to that server. These guys can talk to each other. We can have 3 different servers. We can have the internet out here. All that stuff works, and it all works this little Linux appliance, which, by the way, has no fans, no disk drives. It uses flash memory. And they draw, last we looked, 16 watts. So the answer is, if you need to run a high-speed data system across an entire metropolitan area and get to websites, like our friends at the Minnesota Department of Health, et cetera, want, it works pretty good. So that's our system and our DNAT. We also discovered DHCP works, and also PPPoE works. So that's pretty slick in terms of getting these little guys to talk. And I made the decision to use separate subnets, which is driving everybody crazy. But the beauty of using all the different subnets is the Linux appliances then can be used to drive the linking. And I was bugging the ICOM people, said, for God's sakes, tell us what this funky linking protocol you guys use is, and we'll make some homemade stuff, because I can't afford the $5,000 link radios. Passing the hat, it takes a long time to get $5,000 in the hat. So we, in 2007, put out the word, and truth be told, we sent out an email to all those emergency managers, went and visited in the whole state, and said, a new federal standard, remember we're from the federal government, is D-Star. And if you want to participate in the largest mass casualty event in Minnesota, you got to have D-Star. So it went out as kind of a directive. Someone said, who authorized that? I said, I did. And true story, we're at a ham club meeting about 2-3 weeks ago, and I was at a club, and I said, we've told the state it's a directive, and somebody says, nah, you didn't, and you didn't have authorization. And one of the guys, turns out, was a county emergency manager back row. Yeah, we got 2 new $1 million vans coming in, and we were told had to have D-Star in them. I said, thank you very much, true story. So anyways, look what showed up to play. You know, the average collection of, miscellaneous, trailers and stuff like that. There's our little data trailer. What's that? That's the $1 million Hennepin County Ultra Swank communications van. It came to have what? D-Star installed. We said, thank you for coming, and we'll fix you up and get you up to standards. So they showed up. Here we are in the $1 million trailer. By the way, true story, NMO antennas work poorly at 1.2 gig. And NMO antennas are beloved by the little techs that run the $1 million vans. Not good. We told them about Comet, go up to Radio City and just write a check. Yeah. So here we are testing D-Star. By the way, complaint to the ICOM people, the 25-cent little Ethernet female-to-female connectors, garbage. I've had a lot of bad ones. I put a rant on my website about that. Okay, remember I talked about us fetching the coffee? Okay, guess who was our shadow? Our shadow. Remember, normally we're supposed to shadow the officials. Our shadow at the Twin Cities Marathon last year, the state communications officer. Okay. He was following us around, kind of watching, what's going on here? It was all cool, they were watching the marathon people fetch us coffee. So, sir, would you like some coffee? How about a sandwich? And then I get a note saying, by the way, do you need another van? I said, well, I don't know, maybe. I got to think. So actually, we turned him down the show. We said, sorry, we're kind of busy. We're professionals, and we got a lot on our minds, and we can't really, use a lot of this extra stuff, but we'll think about it. So this one showed up. And then I got a call from the Minneapolis Fire Department. I said, yeah, we have this $2 million 54-foot mobile hospital. It's a tractor trailer with a sled. Can you use that? And I'm like, My first question is, does it have D-Star installed? Well, no. Sorry, can't use it. So here's where we are today. As of literally Friday, it was really funny. When the 35W bridge collapse happened, I got a call from the head of communications for Hennepin County. Happens to be a ham friend of mine. He says, the good news was the APCO 25 stuff worked great. And I think it did. In fact, Skip Jackson, who's our section manager, was interviewed by USA Today or whatever, and he says, they didn't call us. Well, actually, they did call us. Small problem with the data. Remember, APCO 25 really doesn't do data. It does a little bit of data, but not much. They don't have anything like D-Star. The federal people don't. Remember Frontline, this big initiative, 700 meg, fell apart. Okay, so he says, yeah, the voice stuff worked good. They were using some kind of funky commercial air cards. Those didn't work. Note on TV, stay off your cell phones. They were plugged up and they didn't work. So he says, I heard about this D-Star thing. What do you got? I said, well, I need to install some stuff for the marathon. And he says, when do you need it? I said, this is a month good? I said, how's next week? They had a crew, true story, worked around the clock installing that stuff for us on their sites. So we've got 4 repeaters up right now. I got to remember which one is which. I have 3M Center, Minneapolis East, Minneapolis South, and then my newest one in downtown St. Paul. Basically, I got 4 machines. I got one more that's a hot spare. Each one has a Linux appliance on it, running our DNAT code. And then basically the idea is any number of trailers, vans, et cetera, can show up and using some satellite jargon set up an uplink into any of the repeaters. And you can have up to 3 uplinks. I think that's how many we set up. And then any number of radios then can be downlinked into the databases. So that's how that works. We call them uplinks and downlinks. And then the idea is if you deploy a trailer, that we have 802.11 stuff we got out of, dumpsters, right? Like we're using it here. And laptops. So we have as many laptops as we have. So the laptops talk to the trailer talks to the D-Star network. And that gets us Twin Cities-wide coverage. And we've started putting in packet gateways that tie our statewide network into the machines. So the idea is anything big that's wide area, we've got to tie in from here. Now, one of the things that happens when you're driving the state-of-the-art is you get to, well, remember the astronomers get to name planets and asteroids and stuff? Okay, we get to pick our own software, right? Someone says, what software decisions have you made? Well, one day we said, we like this BBS thing, and we want a package that works with packet and web, and it needs to have a conference room. And we found this one called Citadel. It has this really cool feature where if you go in the conference room, it tells you what was said in the last 20 minutes. which is very cool if you're in an emergency, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you go, what's going on? Okay, we got to stop and explain to Bob here, who was sleeping, what's happened in the last 20 minutes. Well, Citadel has this thing where it tells you what happened in the last 20 minutes when you come into the conference room. So we said, you know what? We're going to use Citadel's. Email goes out. New standard, I didn't think I used the word federal, is Citadel. Boom, sent it out. Everybody goes, oh, Citadel. Okay, so the Citadel people find out about it. They're all excited. And this one's open source. And so I think we made a few people mad with this. Do you think? Maybe. But anyways, we got to pick, and it's been a lot of fun to use. It's open source, runs on appliance computers. And it took us quite a while to work on the packet interface because it liked to do one of these every character echoes, which makes packet crazy. So we fixed that. Now, I talked about passing the hat. We could only find one 501(c)(3) in the Twin Cities who liked us, and that was the Skywarn people. And we got a little bit of grant money. And so we said, oh, yeah, you can use this D-Star for weather spotting. This is a 300 kilobit or kilobyte weather map. And it didn't take very long to transmit that up and back. I mean, this system works great for weather maps in terms of here's a full color map. So they said, oh, that looks like weather spotting, so they let us use their bank account to move the money through. Statewide linking is another thing we're thinking about. When we talked about getting the message to Duluth about the COTS or up to Brainerd or down to Rochester. Small problem, complaint to ICOM in the back row. I think he's going to run out here in a minute. Is the official linking radios cost $5,000 an end. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of hats to be passing. So we're going to probably use the Linux computers, TCP/IP, and something like Canopy, Motorola Canopies we're buying on eBay. But this whole linking is something we're working on. Notice we're not using the internet. Every 5 minutes, somebody, Eric, this is all a bunch of nonsense. You should just use the internet for this stuff. I'm going, okay, so I'm going to tell the emergency managers, yeah, we got a couple $2 billion worth of spectrum. We're experts on radio, but we're sorry, the internet's down, and we can't help you. That doesn't work so good. And then I said, well, what about using Windows for this stuff? And I go, okay, so big old internet worm comes out of, Slovakia or something like that. I'm sorry, we're using the same stuff you're using, and I'm sorry, I can't help you. So I don't have those problems. I just don't. And I said, well, how come are you guys worried about that? Getting hacked from over? No, I'm really not. So think of all the headaches this saves us being ham radio operators. Okay, some things we're working on. Repeater linking I talked about. We decided showing up with old desktop computers was kind of lame, right? People say, you guys are a bunch of hobbyists, not getting paychecks. So somebody found on eBay these Sun Netra rack mount 1U servers, very sexy. So we had the Linux team whip up a whole new release of the software last week, which we're going to test just for the heck of it next week at the marathon. I got the other one in my trunk just in case. But this looks cooler, right? We got a problem in digital amateur radio with authentication. If I get a message from Duluth, Minnesota saying, sorry, no COTS, right? Is that a joke message or is that really a message? Now, the FCC rules require the use of authentication, but we don't really have any way to do it. So I think there's probably some people in here who can figure out something with PGP or some way. I would argue we need to develop a digital call sign specification, essentially a digital signature that matches a call sign. So I could say, yeah, that really did come from NY9D. And I think that's something we need to work on. So sometime when we're done putting up repeaters is on our list. This, all it took was one memo to get that one fixed. We're fooling around with laptops on Linux. Ubuntu is almost there for us. It needs to be completely, totally, and utterly idiot-proof, and it's getting there. Our St. Paul Downtown #1 site is fixed. Oh, we're working on this top secret project, which I'm revealing today for the first time. You guys familiar with what is it called? Ricochet, those funny old things that went on light poles? Okay. Those are available in dumpsters near you. So one of our guys found one. He doesn't have any money. He says, I can't afford an ID1. So he says, tell you what, he talked me into putting one bolted onto the Linux appliance up on one of our repeater sites. He says, I can reach it from 3 miles away with a $10 USB card. So we're calling this poor person's D-Star. And so it appears to have similar performance characteristics, about 100 kilobits. And Max, after many, many hours and God knows how many Marlboros, has been figuring out this protocol, and we're going to announce something soon on this. Talking about showing off with the big guys, IP phone systems. Every time you see a picture of an emergency operations center, how are we doing on time, by the way? Pretty good? Good question, good answer. You always see them talking in Cisco IP phones, right? So what did we happen to find the other day? 25 Cisco IP phones. So when we deploy at emergency site, we're going to have 100 kilobits of data, and we're going to use Asterisk, right, the open source IP phone software. We're going to have IP phones on all of our desks too, and they're going to go, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to be happening. They're talking about NIMs, they got IP phones, they have high-speed data, and they're not using the internet because they don't think it's reliable. Bragging points, right? And rack-mounted servers, okay. How are we doing here? Mesh networking. If we weren't so busy, we have this idea, this is kind of a dumpster / eBay thing of finding those access points you can put the open source mesh networking software on. We're working on that. Haven't quite got that one licked, but we're working on that. And then, yeah, at some point, I'm going to have to break down and buy some 440 D-Star equipment. Okay, let's do a quick case study. Got a couple minutes. So we get a call on pandemic flu. Everybody says, that's a bunch of nonsense. No one's going to use it. So we get a call, and we need a vaccination station in 2 hours for 20,000 people in a public building. Who got vaccinated, adverse reactions, and then vaccine supplies and delivery. A lot of buzz going on. Cell phones are overloaded. You know, the power's out. You know, all sorts of bad things are happening, right? Now, of course, the first rule is, if you're a professional, is commercial communication systems cannot fail, right? So you got to remember that. However, we know better, right? So we're going to say, okay, fine. What are we going to do is we're going to roll a trailer or a van. We're going to set up our database. We're going to use phone number as the key. Remember, I don't want to know anybody's social security number, anybody's medical condition. Thanks for asking. Bunch of laptops, the front desk, however many we need. We're going to put an IP phone system. Anybody taken an ARRL Level 1 Emcomm course? Great course. It says a fax machine is a perfectly legitimate piece of communications equipment, right? I mean, truer words are never spoken. Phones are good too, right? Okay, and this is also for bragging rights. Off-the-shelf 802.11. Here you go. Community volunteers for data entry. Why do I need someone with the qualifications of you guys who should be leading the communications doing data entry? That's not our job. And then we can use, you know, NTS, airmail for out of region. If the internet is up, we can use that. Otherwise, we use D-Star. And then, yeah, if the doctors come and say, for God's sakes, I've got to do this study. You know, doctors are always doing a study, right? I say, okay, somebody you trust, say, Bob, here, you go sit in the corner, you take a laptop, we take all your network away from you, and you can, you know, track adverse reactions. We got to keep the doctors happy. So that's what we would do. So I got a minute or two. Any questions?
Well, first of all, very good presentation, but I have one question. You've got, what, 4 or 5 now D-Star repeaters in Minnesota?
We actually have a dozen.
Dozen.
Those just belong to us.
Pardon me?
Those just belong to us. We have a rule that if we have the keys to where the repeater is located, that's one of ours. Because the trouble with borrowing other people's repeaters is they may decide to move to Florida or get crabby or hear a talk and get mad. So yeah, keep going.
So the question is, and how did you ever get the signal pair, the frequency pairs to put up all these repeaters?
Well, okay, good question. The answer is the 1.2 DD mode, number one, hardly anybody is using 1.2. 2, they're not repeaters. They're simplex. And actually, our repeater council wrote us back and says we don't care because they only regulate repeaters, and these are not repeaters. They're repeaters, but they're not repeaters. In fact, we coined a new word. We called them amateur radio access points because they look like the $29, you know, Linksys ones you buy at Best Buy.
So they're only on
1.2, no voice. I'm sorry to disappoint the voice people in the room, but my take is why take a $1,000 ID1 and make it into a poor $99 FM transceiver, right? Because it does a magical thing, which is 100 kilobits of data. And, you know, voice is dime a dozen.
When you use the phone numbers for ID, what do you do about multiple family members? You use like -1 or -A or something like that?
Well, we don't use it as a key. The TrivNet database comes up with a key. We just use it as a, you know, as a kind of a, it's just another data field for us.
So it's not the only identifier?
It's not the only identifier, no. But the idea is if you look up, you know, say, I don't know, they say, give me a phone number. We look it up, say, I got 4 people under that phone number. Yeah. But we sort of like that. It just seems to work for us for emergencies.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, everybody.